So it appears several more people have sighted me walking my dog in my boxers. That means I've got even more Skinwalker stories to share with you. While I work on my utterly destroyed self-confidence and people gaslighting my dog into believing I'm actually a Skinwalker, enjoy these stories and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. Also, be sure to check out eeriecast.com for a whole family of terrifying podcasts for you to enjoy. Now, let's begin. Navajo Skinwalker from C. Philly 100. A story told to me by my old coworker, narrated in his perspective. Some friends and I were on a holiday in Arizona, making our way out to Monument Valley. At one point, we stopped along the road to let the dogs out and take a little nature walk. We'd only gone a couple hundred yards out into the desert, following the dry washes and draws that made up this wild Arizona landscape. That's when we saw a Dene, or Navajo, man standing up on the hillside above us, looking down at us. He was dressed in all black in the traditional fashion, and he had a stern, scowling look on his weathered face. "Hey there. Sorry, friend, we didn't realize this was private property," I called out. No response. He just stood there scowling at us still. Listen, we'll get out of here, mister. We don't want any trouble, we'll just be on our way now." The man began to mutter something under his breath, only it sounded more like a chant or curse than anything else. We backed up down the draw until we could no longer see him or hear that eerie chanting. Later that night, we arrived at the Airbnb where we'd be staying at before the big day in the valley. We ate pizza that night, played some music, and I'd almost forgotten all about the strange encounter. Just then, we heard something out in the front yard. I turned the music down and went to look out the window. Sitting just outside the pool of light from the front porch was a big black dog. It was looking right at me, with these dull yellow eyes, unblinking in the cool desert night. "Hey guys, check it out. There's a dog outside. Come take a look at this," I said. My friend Tommy got up and yawned as he made a big dramatic show of walking over. "Probably just some local res dog," he said. "Maybe just looking for scraps or something." Just then, the dog stood up and started walking towards the side of the house, gradually breaking into a trot. I ran to the bedroom window to keep eyes on the thing, then to the kitchen as it began to actually run around the side of the house. I ran over to the bathroom just in time to see it clearing the corner back into the front yard. I nearly tripped over the dining room table to get back to the front window where the dog was, only it wasn't a dog anymore. What I saw there now was a man, the same man from earlier, dressed in all black, eyes gleaming in the reflection of the floodlights. Even through the window, I could hear his chanting, the same as before, only now my ears were ringing and I had a splitting headache. The last thing I remember, I was clutching my head in pain and feeling like I was about to throw up. When I came to, it was morning. I sat up and saw that all my friends were, similarly, splayed out all over the floor. The place was a mess. The table had been flipped over, and our stuff was everywhere. The front door was open, and there were black paw prints all over the floor. The rest of that trip was a bit of a bust, as we were all feeling sick and hungover, even though we hadn't had anything to drink. It's illegal to buy alcohol on the reservation. To make matters worse, there was a sickly, dead, rotting flesh smell that we couldn't get out of our clothes no matter how hard we tried. I even started having some pretty serious health issues shortly after that, and eventually I had to be hospitalized for acute anemia. The doctors were unable to determine the cause, but I needed 4 units of blood and 5 iron infusions just to stabilize my hemoglobin. I think I need to talk to a native medicine man, but I'm far too frightened to venture back out to the reservation. All I can say is if you're traveling through the Navajo Nation, even in the daytime, be careful where you go or who you talk to. We are guests in their land, unwelcomed guests at that. I don't blame native folks for not liking us, but there are forces at work beyond our understanding here, and we do best to mind our business, sticking to the main thoroughfares. Don't go looking for trouble, because let me tell you, you may just find it, and trouble's going to find you. Skiing Skinwalker, from Daddy Matty. So this happened kind of recently, a few weeks back. I'm a pretty avid skier, and a few weeks ago I was itching to get out. My local mountain wasn't open yet, and I just couldn't wait. I found a section of mountains in northern British Columbia, and they had a very decent amount of snow on them. I called up a friend of mine who's also an avid skier and asked him if he wanted to ski them with me. He said yeah, and I got my other friend to go with us as well. Now, it's never safe to ski alone, even if you're out at a ski resort. All of us have these special bindings for our skis that allow your heel to lock and unlock. These bindings, along with what's called skins, allow us to basically walk on snow. We planned to go for 5 days and do one big loop. We'd climb up peaks and mountains and ski down them, and just do that for all 5 days. The three of us all took one vehicle and loaded up our packs, strapping on our gear and heading out. The first 3 days were a dream. We skied some of the best snow of our lives. There was one section that was so great and so much fun, we stayed a little longer than we should have. After looking at the time, we decided to get heading towards our camp. It got dark out, and once the sun was out of sight, I got an eerie feeling. Not like I was being watched, but more like stalked, like something was following us. We turned on our headlamps, but after 5 minutes my lamp died, which made no sense because I had put fresh batteries in it earlier that day. Not even 10 minutes later, one of my friend's lamps died too. We had our one friend whose lamp was still on leading us from the front. Given past experiences in my life, I thought something was up. However, my friends just said it was the cold that killed the batteries. We were hiking on a ridge, and about 1 kilometer ahead was another ridge. That's where I saw 2 red dots, which I later assumed to be eyes. I told my friend to turn off the lamp, and I told them both to look across at these red dots. There they were, crimson red eyes, looking right at us. Around the same time, we heard a loud howl, but it was so distorted it sounded more like a scream. We heard these screams all night. We made camp, accompanied by these screams. At about 6-ish a.m., I was awakened to the sound of walking and heavy panting outside our tents. I stayed still, terrified of what could be out there. I remembered the screams of the night before. I heard whatever it was beginning to walk away, and I opened my tent slightly, just enough for one eye to peek out. Then I saw it, this huge black wolf. It was standing by a tree. It was about half as tall as the tree itself, about 10 to 12 feet. It jumped right around, and the crimson red dots that we'd seen before now stared right back at my one eye. Then it screamed. In the scream you could almost make out in a distorted way, because of this wolf's close proximity to the camp. The scream woke up my friends. Then it ran off. That morning we got up and headed out. It sounded like that thing had said, "This is my mountain," and I hoped it wasn't talking about the specific mountain we were on. Just as we were about to set out again, we saw it in broad daylight on the ridge across from us. It looked back and screamed. Then an avalanche happened right in front of us. Seeing that thing, we decided to cut our trip short. We made our way to a shortcut. This took us all day and it was getting dark, but we kept going even through the dark. We were now in a valley and we continued on, eventually seeing those red eyes again on top of a hill staring down at us. we decided to make our way up to the opposite hill that the eyes were on. We got halfway up the hill with a large part of the mountain looming above us. The screams returned then. That night was a sleepless one, as I was constantly awake hearing those screams, knowing that something was outside. I pretended to sleep though, hoping that that thing would leave in peace. I know it returned into our camp, but eventually I did hear it walk away. I heard it scream again before leaving. After it was gone, we got up and packed up. Just as we set out, when we were about 30 feet away from our camp, an avalanche came pouring down right in the place we were just sleeping. We booked it out of there, making it back to the truck. I looked back as we drove away, looking right into that wolf's eyes again. I'm not really sure what that thing wanted. Maybe just privacy, wanting us to leave, but maybe it had different ideas. Something tells me if we had been caught in that avalanche, we would have ended up as a tasty cold meal for that thing. There are things in the mountains we're not meant to see. Stay safe this shredding season. Skinwalker story, I think, from Butterfly 7. Just a few days ago, I was at my aunt's house. I was going to be staying for 2 nights. I'm from Hawaii and have lots of strange and creepy experiences, and I'm here to share this one with you in particular. We were out in the woods of Pennsylvania. I was a little creeped out by the woods, but I didn't really dwell on it. I've always been paranoid after all, and have really bad anxiety. On my first night there, I was asleep on an air mattress. However, it quickly deflated, and soon I was just basically on the floor. I was looking out the windows that had the blinds down. My parents were sleeping downstairs, and my brothers were asleep on the couch. As I began to finally calm down, I started to hear light scratching sounds coming from the roof. I brushed it off and started scrolling through some videos on YouTube, trying to distract myself. As I said, I'm just paranoid sometimes, and I figured the sound was nothing. As I listened to some music, I began hearing banging sounds, and even more, louder scratching coming from the roof. I plugged both my earbuds in, and after a while, the sounds changed to a walking sound, like someone walking in a circle above me. I was still trying to convince myself it was just a tree branch, but the thought of it being anything else quickly sunk into my mind. After a while, it stopped, but I was still freaked out, and it took a long time for me to finally get some sleep. The next day was fun. We went out to eat, and I got upgraded from the air mattress to my cousin's old bed. The thoughts of last night had mostly left my mind. That night, when I was getting settled into my cousin's bed, I constantly looked out the window. It was getting dark, and the window didn't have curtains or anything like that. I put some thick blankets on the bed and started to relax. Like the night before, I turned on some YouTube, looking up some animations, I think. After a while, my aunt said goodnight and turned off all the lights, closing the door. Just then, I saw movement outside, so I looked up and out the window. The banging and scratching sounds came again, soon followed by that circular pacing right above me. I closed my eyes, taking in deep breaths, trying to calm myself. I turned up the video I was watching, and after a while, the noise stopped. I felt calm enough to open my eyes. But when I did, I peered out the window and saw something that I don't think I should have. Whatever it was, it looked like a starved wolf with deer-like limbs and big, glowing eyes, glowing in the same way a cat's eyes would if you flash light on them. This thing stood on hind legs without breaking eye contact with me. I watched, petrified, as it began to walk closer to the window. I gathered my courage and quickly got up, walking to the bathroom. I stayed in the bathroom for a very long time. After that, I crept out of the bathroom and slid into bed. I glanced over at the window, and I saw the same big yellow eyes staring at me. I don't think I slept that night, and I was ever so happy to leave when the trip was over. Warning: the following story contains explicit depictions of dead animals. An encounter with a Skinwalker. From Supernatural Hunter. On the news one day, we heard of this little girl who had gone missing on a family hike. At the time, we had nothing better to do, and we didn't want to do homework, so we went out to look for her ourselves, we being me and my friends. We went looking near where she was supposedly taken. She had apparently been taken near a road that she walked on her way back from school. We decided to search the public land that was across the road. This was about 1,000 acres of land. We spent the entire day searching, and soon it was getting late. One of our friends, who didn't believe in the supernatural, thought it would be funny to call out a Skinwalker. They practically screamed it. This sent me and a couple of other people into a hot mess. We started yelling at this idiot, calling him names and things like that. I was in the middle of using every cuss word in my vocabulary when, I kid you not, a shrill shriek sounded from somewhere in the woods. It sounded like it came from all directions. At that moment, I swear I forgot how to breathe. We began to quickly make our way back to the vehicles, heading down the trail. The entire time, I felt as if I was being watched. Since the moment I heard that noise, I had this constant, crushing, overwhelming fear that something bad was about to happen. That's when it started getting really creepy. We never noticed it before. Or maybe it wasn't there before, but we saw what appeared to be bird bones hanging from the trees, and deer legs bent at the joint over different rocks and branches. Animal skulls hung on the fence posts. Before I came here, I always had a bad feeling about this place. Before this, people had discovered Native American remains here, various human bones. I'd once seen a spine myself on a barbed wire fence. How it got there and who put it there, I have no idea. Suddenly, something dropped from a tree and landed on the person in front of me. They screamed with intense fear, yelling about blood on their face. That's when we all hightailed it back to safety, running as fast as we could all go. We tripped and stumbled over one another. Finally, we made it back to where we parked our vehicles. I'd stopped then and asked one of my friends to shine the flashlight from the direction we had just come from. When he did, we saw eyes looking back at us. Eyes from a height that could not be human. Whatever it was making some kind of human-like sound, though. It was far enough away down the trail, but then it began to rush towards us extremely fast. I jumped through the open window. Most of us did, and we sped out of there quickly. The next morning, we went back, bringing weapons with us this time. It got a little weird. Walking down the trail, something had caught my eye. When I went to check it out, there were these red rocks placed in a circle around a headless deer. There was blood, too. At least I'm pretty sure it was blood, covering the ground. To this day, none of us ever speak of what happened. Some people moved, and those that remained never went back there. But someday I do want to go back. I need to know what's out there for sure. Skinwalker in Shreve, Ohio. From Pat from Shreve. This was my experience with a Skinwalker in Wayne County, Ohio. It was 2009. My best friend B and I were camping in my backyard in rural Shreve, Ohio. I grew up on a couple of acres of land surrounded by roughly 1,500 acres of farmland. As we were camping and YouTubing skateboard videos, we heard coyotes in the woods off to our left. This is really common where I'm from, and generally, the coyotes don't bother people. But these coyotes were yelling and being loud and then just stopped making noise all of a sudden. This was the first thing that really had us on edge. Then, out of nowhere, we hear this sniffing sound, which sounded like it was coming from a very large dog. It was coming from literally right outside the tent. To be honest, we were pretty freaked out. This would be the closest a coyote had ever been to either of us. But then the unthinkable happened. A hand that was more human in shape ripped open the tent door. But then there was silence and stillness. Whatever had tore up our tent had just stopped. It wasn't doing anything. We sat there in that terrifying silence, just looking out in the dark for what felt like 5 minutes or so. Suddenly, something huge began to crawl underneath the tent, growling viciously. My friend grabbed a hammer that we'd used for the tent stakes, and he began to beat away at this thing where he thought the head was, instead of a pained cry or yelp like any normal dog would. This thing growled demonically. After hitting it a few times more, we sprinted through the tent door across the 1-acre yard and through the door to my garage. Every time I glanced back, I saw this big shadow following closely. No definition to it, just a pitch black form in the middle of nowhere. We get inside, and that's really where the story ends. I just remember being terribly scared for the whole night, and I never trusted those woods again. While I don't have any obvious ways to prove this was a skinwalker, it's all I can think it to be, based on it sounding like a large dog while having a human-like hand and making low demonic growling noises. I'll also note that while my friend B was running in front of me, I heard his voice yelling, "Stop," but it was coming from behind me. That's my tale, and that's why now I learn all I can about cryptozoology. Were-Coyote in Arizona. From Anonymous Shadow. My family and a couple of cousins of mine all love riding cars, quads, and motorbikes. On a Monday, we went riding around the Wickenburg area, which was about 1 hour from our home. I was going down this little gravel road around 35 miles per hour on my uncle's red quad, and it was getting dark fast. I got to this little hill at the end of the road, and I told myself, I'll just go down, turn around, and come back up, and go back to the cars. That was when I heard some rustling in the bushes at the edges of the turnaround area at the base of the little hill I was on. My heart began to race. But a rabbit came running out, and I told myself I was just overreacting. A couple of coyotes then appeared, running after the rabbit. I got a little bit scared because I wasn't sure how they'd react to my presence, or if they had rabies or anything like that. There seemed to be about 4 adults and 2 pups, so they could have easily attacked me if they wanted to. Back then, I was a 13-year-old with a quad. That wasn't going to save me if they decided to attack. Sure, I could try to run them over, but that meant I would have flown down the hill, most likely ending with me crashing. I decided to slowly start moving my quad as quietly as I could, kinda trying to pick it up and turn it. Yeah, I know, don't turn your back to predators. But at the time, I was scared. Suddenly, I heard low guttural growling coming close to me, up the hill. But luckily, I had finished turning around my quad. When I turned to look, the biggest of the coyotes was coming up the hill towards me, growling at me. This one was bigger, way bigger than even my dogs, which were German shepherds. It was getting close to me, so I got back on the quad, and I swear that freaking coyote stood up on 2 legs. It might sound crazy, or even cliche for a story like this, but I'm not sure how else to say it. The thing just stood up like a man. From the time it stood to the time I went about 40 getting back to my family, I saw for sure that it had a coyote's head, dull glowing yellow eyes, and a human-like body, with bent back legs like a werewolf, and a coyote's tail. It's been a while since then, and for some time after that, I didn't sleep very well at all. My usual dreamless, boring nights have been filled with waking up in a cold sweat, nightmares of being attacked, flashbacks of that moment. My mom and dad just chalked it up to my imagination and all those scary things I listened to. But I listened to those things because they were fun. But now they're the only thing I have keeping me from insanity, knowing I'm not alone with encounters like this. Possible Skinwalker. From CC. For a little background, I live in West Virginia, so basically everything is up or down. My house is situated on a hillside. The front yard goes upward to the road, and once you cross it, it goes down rather steep into an almost valley, until you go back up another hill, which is covered in woods up it, but at the top is a clearing and you can see sort of where the tree line ends from the base. This entire side is my neighbor's, and they let us use their trampoline, which is at the base. At the time, I was maybe 12 years old. I had a friend over named Candace. We had just finished eating some mug treats and watching some witch movie when we decided to go outside and jump on the trampoline. We'd been off and on the thing all day, mostly playing music and occupying my neighbor's twin grandkids who were about 5. We were excited because we finally had the trampoline all to ourselves. However, it was getting dark, and before long we could only see each other's faces with our phone screens. I had my back to the woods, and Candace was opposite me. The moon was pretty bright, so I could see the top of the hill if I looked at the right spot. It was eerily quiet. Usually the coyotes would be barking and howling, but they seemed pretty far off, even when we heard the occasional howl. We had fallen into a silence. She was changing the song when I felt the hair on the back of my neck raise up. Naturally, I turned around, scanning my surroundings that I could see due to my eyes having been adjusted to the dark. Then I saw what I thought was at first a deer. Well, the silhouette of one. I was sort of in awe. I saw this thing that I thought was a buck, but then I noticed other features. The way it held itself up on 2 legs, the way the shape of its head was mangled and looked so wrong, the antlers too. Candace hit my leg, asking me what was wrong with me. I ignored her and kept staring at the thing. I could tell it was staring at me too. Immediately, I stood up, starting to usher Candace out of the trampoline so she could get her boots on. Then, I couldn't believe it when it happened. That thing spoke in my mother's voice.
Danny.
I practically pushed my friend out of the trampoline, telling her to just grab her shoes and run. She did what I asked and started running back towards the road. I stayed behind her, making sure she didn't trip or fall behind. Then it called again, louder and more demanding this time, like when you're about to get in serious trouble and your mom uses that tone.
Danica.
I didn't even turn. Knowing my mom was back at the house, I knew this couldn't be her. We made it inside, and Candace looked at me funny. She asked why I did that, then brushed me off as being paranoid from the movie earlier. She never saw that thing, and I guess she never heard it. The rest of that night was, luckily, uneventful. Skinwalker in Saskatchewan. From Terrence XLIV. This happened to me on October 27th, 2021 at around 3 a.m. I live on a farm in Saskatchewan, Canada. For the sake of context, I need to go back to when I was 10. One day when I was 10 years old, I was outside doing chores at about midnight because I'd lost track of time. Suddenly, I began to hear screaming, like a man and a woman being murdered out in the field. It sounded extremely close. I asked my dad what he thinks that is. He said, nothing. Probably some kind of animal. I decided to grab a kitchen knife for protection, even though it would probably do absolutely nothing to an animal larger than me. But it did make me feel safe. These sounds happened every once in a while, every couple of months, maybe once or twice a month at the most. Now let's get back to October 27th, 2021. One night, or morning, I went out at 3 a.m. because I forgot to cut a bale of hay for some horses. On my way back behind my house, I saw something disturbing that's hard to explain. There was something standing there in the corner of my eye. I didn't get the best look at it, but it had these huge legs and a really small head and thin neck. It looked extremely different from anything we had in our fields, and it was unlike any natural animal out in these parts. I didn't even scream. I just ran back to my house. It's a short experience, but a creepy one. I still hear those sounds every so often. I'm not sure what to do. There's not much I can do. Living on a farm in the middle of nowhere. Fields on all four sides of the place. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.